All right. Hey everybody, it's Carolyn. I just wanted to invite you on this call that I'm actually doing below you on my computer with my good friend Emery. And so we're going to be talking about barriers to intimacy. So she's going to actually kick it off here in a second. So you're just along for the ride.
Hi, Marilyn. Miss Marilyn, welcome back. So good to see you. Let me take you off mute.
Hi.
Hi, how are things?
Pretty good.
I haven't seen you in a couple months. How's your daughter?
She's off again for her second trip, 3-day weekend with her girlfriend again this month. First it was for their anniversary at the beginning of the month, and now it's just to go camping. So me and the kids are here having fun.
Sounds fabulous. Do you remember Carolyn from the last, have you been to her previous workshops? She's
I don't know if it was one of your free ones, then I probably was there.
Nice. Yeah.
It was like the stress management ones. I did a couple of the stress management ones here with Emery on this one. So
hey, is my audio okay?
It's a little bit like reverb. There's some reverb from it. I'm not sure why, but
I don't know how to fix that.
It's probably just the internet connection. I asked about the bandwidth to my provider because I had to renew my contract, and they said that it depends on how many people in your area are also on the internet at the time.
Really?
Sometimes that happens, but I don't know. It sounds fine. I mean, like I said, there's a little reverb, but
slower. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Last time the recording, it had that robot. I was like, yeah. Let me see if I could try and do something about that. This is the part where I wish I had an IT on hand.
Yeah. What kind of computer do you have?
Not an Apple.
Oh.
HP.
Oh. Cool. So how much longer do you want to give it, Emery? And we will maybe, I don't know, like 3 more minutes or something?
Yeah. Let me see if I could get this.
Maybe I can share this, share it to a group. Let's see, which group should I share it to? How about inspiring significant change? That's my group. All right, so we'll share there.
How do I sound now?
Oh, worse.
Worse?
Mm-hmm.
Now.
But say something else.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
That's better. That's good. Okay, cool. All right, I'm just gonna let it go as like this. I think guest requests, no. Share to group, no. I think we're good. Okay, cool.
Okay, you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Welcome to GirlSpace. We are a social network of women entrepreneurs that lead workshops once a month. If you'd like to lead a workshop to help further your career, just DM me, like Miss Carolyn here. I just want to remind everyone this is a safe space where we can speak freely. The more raw, the more real, so we can help empower each other. Today, we're going to talk about 10 barriers to intimacy and how we can break them. Introducing your host, Carolyn Maul. She has a master's degree in holistic nutrition, and her main area of expertise lies in inspiring others to shift their mindset to understand the power of positive thinking and healthy living. Welcome back, Carolyn.
Yay! Thank you. I am excited to be here, and so I'm a repeat offender here, obviously, on Emery's station. But I am not doing my normal thing today. Instead, we're going to really dive deep into barriers to intimacy and relationships, and like how we interact with each other. Um, and I loved putting this together. I have a lot of notes. Like I take copious notes when I'm preparing for things. And this is actually the first time that I've like given this sort of lecture formally, we'll say. Like normally I talk to my clients about this on a one-on-one basis, but today we're actually going to do it like in a group style. So basically I'm learning too as we go along how to put these things together. So yes, I did promise everybody that we're going to talk about the 10 most common barriers to intimacy, and then 3 things that you can do, easy things that you can start doing right away, or even just being aware of, to be able to break those down. So on the outset, I want to say that I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a psychologist. I'm just simply 45 years old and have had a ton of relationships. I've been studying not only human anatomy and like human psychology for all of these years. It's all of this, everything that we talk about today, all of these barriers to intimacy are really applicable for not only like a romantic relationship, but also with your family, with your coworkers. Like what we're going to be talking about today is really, like I said, applicable to anybody that you come into contact with. Because what I've found is, and what I truly believe is that like intimacy happens daily. We are in intimate relationships and in intimate, how should I say, like just, an ongoing dialogue is happening. And the more we are able to be ourselves and be vulnerable and open up to other people, the more they reciprocate on that. So anyhow, to just get started, I could go on and on and on about barriers to intimacy. And I also wanted to talk about some that are subjective, right? Like some that are only in your mind, and then some that are objective, like things that are obviously like factual and real. So when you think about your own self, right? When you think about yourself and your interactions with people, and you think about ways that you, A, feel shut down, and B, shut other people down, what is coming into your mind? And one of the first barriers, right, that is very typical is for people to use blame, disparagement, demeaning words around you, right? And so like if you feel constantly to blame for things, you're obviously going to be shutting down in your ability to interact with that person, whoever that is. So, there's people get blamed for all kinds of things. And there's a cultural context that goes into this as well. Different cultures have different meanings, and they have different expectations. There's family issues that you're going to have to deal with, and you'll get blamed for things there. But especially like disparaging comments. If you're in a relationship where either you're doing this or the other person is doing this, this is a huge barrier, because once that person is on the defensive and gets shut down over and over and over and over and over and over and over, it's really, really hard to bring that back. So a big barrier to intimacy is the words that we use and how we are treating other people. I have this whole list actually too. And before I do the whole like 10 things, so that was like number 1 on my list of 10. But so I'm just going to kind of read things off. And if something strikes you as like, wow, that's totally me, maybe just make a mental note of that, write it down. So there's a lot of barriers to intimacy, as we all know. One of them is obviously communication issues. There's family issues, there are sexual difficulties if you're insecure about what's happening in the bedroom. Do people have a lack of listening skills? Do you have a lack of listening skill? Do they? There's often a conflict of roles. So this is a huge thing that I want to discuss a little bit more in depth, but so role conflict. Power imbalances, right? Who is in charge? There's often a fight for control. This is a huge one for me in my life. Then there's things like weight status. Like people who are overweight or obese often have different barriers to intimacy than than normal weight people. This has to do with all kinds of body image issues. So that's another thing, how we perceive ourselves. This is kind of a random one, but there are people who have suffered from traumatic brain injuries, repeated concussions, like, professional football players, right? There are some traumatic brain injury things that we have experienced in our lives that make it difficult for us to be able to relate to people on emotional levels and communicate our own feelings because we can't access them appropriately. And then there's the obvious, I say obvious, it is obvious, but it's hard to talk about addictions, drugs, alcohol, work, addictions and dependencies, alcoholism. When you are dealing with people with addiction problems, it becomes an extreme barrier to intimacy, not only because those people often let you down, but the trust issues there are always there. And so those are the main ones. There are other things like having wishful thinking about someone or something and not being realistic about the intimate relationship that you have. There's things like intellectualizing too much and not being able to access your own emotions. So those were a lot, right? Those are a lot of barriers to intimacy, but they all occur. And for some of us more than others. So we think about, what does intimacy provide, right? Like, why is this even important to talk about? You know what I mean? And so intimacy provides things like safety, a feeling of safety. You feel protected, you can trust, you feel nurtured. And there's also a sense of predictability and dependability within that relationship and within your life. And these are things that we need, like on an emotional level, in order to feel safe and to be able to open up to others. So if I feel like I cannot trust you, I cannot depend on you, you're unreliable, there can be no intimacy, there can be no true love at that point when the trust is gone. So here again, like looking at our relationships with others and thinking about truly, what is it that's holding us back? There are often times where you don't feel safe, either emotionally or physically. And that's something to really, really recognize. Along those same lines, domestic violence, this is a topic that has to be discussed within this realm. Like, nobody likes to talk about abuse, but it happens. And it happens to a lot of people, both men and women. And once you have encountered a domestic violence episode, right, in your own home or with someone that you trusted, those walls go up, and there's barriers now in every area of your life. It's scary, I know, but there are a lot of resources out there. So we'll get to that later too. So how do relationships stay strong, right? So we've got all these barriers, but how do they stay strong? And so I made a little list here. So basically, in my opinion, one of the best ways for a relationship to stay strong is to be able to cultivate open communication with your partner. Again, when I say your partner, this might be your sister, it might be your lover, it might be your husband, it might be, your coworker, but the necessity for open and honest communication is the pathway to intimacy. And Marianne Williamson writes a lot about topics in like A Course in Miracles, where she really goes on and on about seeing another person without judgment. And oftentimes we judge another person because they're displaying an action that we do too, and we don't like it, and they are our mirror, and it just triggers us right off because we are seeing in someone else the things that we do not like about ourselves. And this is real, like this is so real, right? Like okay, so like personal example, when I'm having an argument with my boyfriend and he's just deflecting and everything I say, he's like, no, will you there's this constant deflection that drives me bonkers, right? However, in retrospect, do I not do the same thing at times? I absolutely do. It's, it's a defense mechanism. And when you're being accused or blamed or something, like you automatically like want to defend yourself. So anyhow, those are things that we have to learn to accept in other people in order to accept it in ourselves. And that's kind of like what breaks the spell. Yeah, I know. It's really that simple. It's not easy. It's simple. And so thinking about that, thinking about like, okay, in my communication habits, like, because we all have habits about how we speak and what the words that we say. And so looking back at some of our past arguments with people and where, like, again, where I shut down, where you shut down, what shuts you down. It's just good to note these things and, look within for a moment, because the intimacy part of relationships is what teaches us how to grow as an individual. And I learned this from Lisa Nichols, actually. She says intimacy, the word intimacy, right? If you break it down, intimacy, into me, I see. Into me, I see. Through
Wow.
you, right? That's
I'm
kind
writing
of
that one down.
Mm-hmm. So intimacy is a way that we can learn more about ourselves. Our interactions with people are our baseline, right? For our self-growth, self-love. So many important things in our lives are because of our relationships. So, and they allow us to have a mirror into me, I see. So how do relationships stay strong? Like going back to that. So we've got the open communication and figuring out what is triggering us. What are we doing in our partner that triggers them? Because it's pretty clear, like, what you're doing when you're doing it, but you're going to do it anyhow because it's the heat of the moment, right? And so that destroys trust. And when someone knows that they might be, that you're doing something on purpose, and you know what you're doing, very well what you're doing, and you're going to do it anyhow. They're like, how can I trust you again? Because you're going to use that against me, or you're going to pull that card, or whatever the case may be. So relationships stay strong when there is an unconditional commitment. So this is a big one, like having an unconditional commitment to someone. Now, I've said for years and years and years that the only way that I ever learned unconditional love was by having my kids. Like, until I actually had babies, I did not understand what unconditional love felt like. You don't get it from your parents. They unconditionally love you. But to unconditionally love someone else is hard. It's a lot of work. And so, but unconditional commitment to one another, not exactly like acceptance of all of their behaviors, because some things need work, but unconditional commitment to each other. Then, time together. People need time together in order to create an intimate relationship. Like, you have to be spending the time together. And that's not like one date night a week, or that's not like an hour or two here or there. That's like taking time and making sure that you're having quality conversations and quality interactions during that time. So like sitting down and watching TV together is technically doing something together, but there's no real interaction happening there. So overcoming hardship is another way that people strengthen their relationships. overcoming hardship, like bonding through a traumatic experience, going through something together. Those are all ways that people actually can strengthen their intimate bonds and intimate relationships with each other. So then there's the obvious things of sharing what you think about your spirituality, right? Things that are sacred to you, things that are important to you. And when you have a safe space, and this is another thing, like if you have a safe space zone, whatever that means to you, it might be the kitchen table discussion, it might be the bedroom discussion, it might be like going off into a conference room discussion, but if you can actually state clearly, again, goes back to the open communication, this is a safe space, just like you do. Every single time you start one of these, this is a safe space. And that's really important to maintain trust and to create an intimate relationship. So here we are. And, another thing too, aside from like social support and family support, is being able to reduce the demands that we have on one another. So this is kind of where I wanted to talk about those roles, right? So oftentimes, one of the barriers to intimacy that people have is because they're being asked to fulfill too many roles in one relationship, right? So it didn't always used to be like this. It used to be very more cut and dry about what is the role of the husband, what is the role of the wife, what is the role of the first son, what is the role of, you know what I mean? Like people had designated roles within their cultural community. Not so much anymore, right? Roles, gender, age, all of these things are blending together now in a way that hasn't happened before. And so oftentimes now when we're meeting someone or when we're with a partner, we expect them to be all of the things, which is impossible. So like you can't have at the same time, you can't have friendship and eroticism. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't have like this erotic fantasy life with someone who is also your best friend at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Like you guys can have two different times in your relationship for those two different places, but they can't happen at the same time.
Really? Why not?
There has to be trust to have eroticism, first of all, and there has to be trust to have a deep, deep friendship, but those things aren't happening at the same time, right? You don't want that. Then it wouldn't be fun. Then it wouldn't be erotic. Then it wouldn't be scary, adventurous. You know what I mean? And so people want to be able to play. So like there's this kind of thing like, take care of me, but play with me. Are you my playmate or are you my parent? Are you my lover or are you my BFF? Like, do I have practical support from you or do I have emotional support from you? So this is what I was saying about the dance between, what did I say? I liked what I said. The dance between intimacy and autonomy is another thing. Like we ride this very, very thin line sometimes about our needing of our own space and being with others. So there's always this, I've been reading too many scholarly articles, but there's a perpetual oscillation, right? There's a perpetual oscillation between needing to be autonomous, needing to be on our own, and needing to be with others, needing to be taken care of, and needing to be independent. And there again, it's the oscillation, it's the back and forth. It's like, it's not always the same thing. And we don't need both of the things at the same time. We can only have and be and do one thing at a time. So sometimes we feel alienated in a relationship, but sometimes we're accused of being a narcissist for not. So there's like narcissism and an alienation. Like those are two dichotomy things that we're always like oscillating back and forth. And then there's like being needy, like, am I needy? Does someone perceive me as needy? Or am I completely just submerged in this relationship? Like there's submergence and then there's neediness, there's clinginess, and then there's, growth and expansion. So intimacy involves riding that line back and forth and the oscillation between individualism and partnership. And that's why it's so challenging, because to get two people swaying on this, like in the same swing set, right? Imagine being on a swing set. You're never like totally in line with the other person. Like sometimes you get in the groove together, but then one person's heavier, one person's pumping their legs harder, you know, and then you're off a little bit. So to be able to have an intimate relationship is to be able to understand that sometimes like your swing set's a little bit off, but you're on the same swing set, right? And so the thing about having too many roles is that people's expectations of their partners and other people is sometimes just way too high. There is no one who is going to be your playmate and your parent and your lover and offer you practical support and emotional support and everything all at the same time, and no one to give you personal space and no one you want to have an intellectual conversation. Like, it's impossible. It's unfair to ask. And so understanding that in that intimate relationship, the communication part is key, because unless you state what it is that you need at the time, no one is going to know what you need at the time.
Okay, this is mind-blowing. So mind-blowing. I thought I could have it all at the same time and be rich.
But see, you can, it's just not with one person. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is something that I say about relationships all the time. I've said this for years and years. Like, there's, in my opinion, there's three main parts in any relationship, right? In any successful relationship, you've got the physical part, you've got the intellectual part, and then you've got the emotional / spiritual part. You're never going to get all three from one person. I hate to break it to you, babe, but all three cannot come from the same person. If you've got two that are solid, that is a relationship worth working on. If you've got one iffy, it doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, one of those three will not sustain a relationship. Two of the three solid will. Three is basically an impossibility. People. What are
the three categories?
So the first one is like is physicality, right? Like, how do you guys groove physically? How is your sex life, right? Like, how is it like touching each other? Do you have a successful like physical encounters, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second one is intellectual. And so there are some people who are very cerebral and they live up in here, and that is their gift. And like, to be able to connect with them on an intimate level, you have to be up here at that level. But then the third one is emotional. And I kind of do like emotional / spiritual, because that goes along with the very subjective emotions and things that we can't prove factually, right? Emotions aren't facts. It's not that they're not true. It's that they're not facts and they change. So those are the three areas. And so like, and there again, I'll just use myself as an example. Saying I can't have all three, knowing that I can't have all three. If I've got two solid, okay. So like currently, like the physical part is awesome. The emotional spirituality part is solid. The intellectual part is nowhere near this. Okay.
Oh my God, it's such a tough choice.
You have, okay, but here it is. I can easily make that choice because I have this. I have so many other people where I share my intellectual world. Like, I am not missing that in my life. I don't expect that one person to be able to fulfill all those areas. That would be crazy. It's that we have two, and that I have another outlet for my intellectual relationship needs.
Oh, you can get it elsewhere.
Yes.
I could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And there again, like sometimes you've got the intellectual and the physical, but not the emotional, spiritual. And that's why you go to church. That's why you have a support group. That's why you have a therapist. That's why you have, you know what I mean? Somebody else who's going to fill that gap for you. And sometimes it's the physicality part. Like sometimes it's, you know, there again, like you've been in an accident, like there's some kind of like physical thing that happened to your body, or you guys just aren't like physically compatible, super. But everything else is so on.
Yeah.
The physicality part can be remedied in other ways. I mean, there's lots of toy stores out there, right? And there's also things like the gym and races and, competing. And so there's always a way to get your needs met. Sometimes you have to be a little creative about it. But an intimate relationship is someone who is being honest with you and sharing what they do have, and you accepting all of them, even the parts that don't work for you.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not all about you sometimes. Because some of the things that people are afraid of, right? Like so let's address our biggest fears. Like our biggest fears in intimate relationship are basically like fear of being exposed. We're afraid for people to see who we really are, because we might be judged, we might be hurt, So exposure. We're very afraid of vulnerability. We're afraid of being hurt. This is a normal human characteristic. Like that is like self-preservation, We're afraid of shame. We're afraid of being humiliated. We're afraid of losing autonomy. We're afraid of losing control. We're all of the fear has to do with loss. And we're afraid of abandonment. We're afraid of betrayal. Some of us are afraid of physical violence. These things have happened, and you are afraid of them happening again. And that is absolutely fair. Also, understanding that intimate relationships always reactivate earlier unresolved conflicts. Yeah, write that one down.
I'm taking this. Took a line on that one.
Because whether it's a parental thing or whether it was a relationship that you had 10 years ago, things that don't get resolved, like in psychological terms, it's called repetition compulsion. We do the same thing over and over and over and over again, and we can see ourselves doing it, and we're like, why do I always date the same kind of guy? Why do I always get a job I know I'm going to quit? Why, you know what I mean? We do the same thing over and over and over, trying subconsciously to resolve an issue that we have. And it's maddening, but we do it anyhow. And so the thing about intimate relationships is that you have to understand that they are going to reactivate things that are unresolved. So how can you make space for that to happen, right? Like you have to understand that it is happening in the moment, right? You have to have presence of mind enough to understand, like, I am triggered right now. What is it about? And then taking the space before you react again to figure out how to respond instead of react. Mm-hmm. Especially like if you had a childhood that had a lot of you were criticized a lot as a child, for whatever reason, like you will always fear being attacked or fear of intimacy. Because that very, very vulnerable time in early childhood is something that we struggle with for the rest of our lives. And so if our needs aren't being met, if we're not seen for our gifts and seen for who we are, those are deficits then in our emotional life that we're going to encounter over and over. People will trigger those for sure. And so just a couple other things, and then I'll go down my list, right? So there's something, again, like in psychological terms, when people talk about barriers for intimacy, sometimes you're in a relationship with someone, or maybe you are the person who exhibits ambivalence. And so ambivalence is constantly shifting between like love and hate. You see all the good or you see all the bad. And so there again, it's that perpetual oscillation, but this is happening within one person. And so they're ambivalent, like you never know who you're going to get on any given day. Like they love you, they hate you. There's this like intensity of emotion. And that black and white dichotomy, which is dichotomous thinking, right? There's another term, but you have insecurity within that relationship. You have that unpredictable nature, and the insecurity that it breeds makes you crazy. You know what I mean? So there's actually like a real term is ambivalence. So going from hot to cold, I love you, I hate you. You know, I can see all of your good stuff. Oh my God, you can't do anything right. So that's a huge barrier to intimacy in a relationship when you're with someone, or maybe you are that person. And there again, like, I know that I've been guilty of so many of these things, which is why it was easy for me to be able to put all this together. Like in my mind, sometimes I'm like, oh, you know, you're so handsome. I love you so much. And then I'm like, oh my God, I freaking hate you. Like, how could you do that? You know, that's scary to people.
It is. I just thought he was bipolar, or he was Gemini and he has two sides, and I just don't know how to deal. You never know how they're going to respond.
Yeah. And
So
that is a huge barrier.
that's when you bounce.
Yeah. You can't live with that. You cannot live with,
No.
with unpredictability like that. It just really doesn't work. And here's, okay, so here's my one last thing that I'm going to say. Actually, that's not true. What am I talking about?
I love it.
Intimate relationships are not entirely mature relationships. Okay. Like you can be this amazingly intellectual, pulled together person with an amazing professional life. But then you come home and you act in ways that are childish and immature in your intimate relationships. It doesn't make any sense to any of us, especially when you're the one doing it. But intimate relationships do not bring out maturity in the majority of people. People act immature because they're, again, like, we're still like reliving the childhood things, like all of the trauma that we've experienced in the past is going to get rekindled a little bit. And if we haven't learned how to maturely have a conversation and maturely interact with your partner, how are you supposed to know that? This is not a life skill that is often taught. And there again, it comes down to communication. It comes down to like knowing yourself. And there again, a lot of people aren't encouraged to do that. So knowing yourself, right? You have an intimate relationship with yourself, whether you know it or not. You have an intimate relationship with your private life. Like, you have a private world inside. You have fantasies, you have daydreams, you imagine things. You know what I mean? No one else knows about this. This is between you and your mind. And you have your own memories, you have your own personal longings. That is your intimate self. There's things that you feel like, that you kind of feel like are maybe forbidden, like semi-forbidden feelings, like, oh, I shouldn't feel that way, or I shouldn't look at that, or I shouldn't want that. That's all another intimate relationship that you're cultivating on your own. It's part of your like inner child, right? Like the part of you that's playful and spontaneous and creative and thinks of things that no one else knows. And this is where like technology expands and creativity happens. The world gets better because of this place, because of people's imagination, and because of the ability for them to communicate it somehow to someone else who can then take that vision and make a rocket ship out of it. So that's the beauty of cultivating your intimate private life, and then being in a place that you trust enough people to express that. All right. I need some water here. All I'm doing is talking.
I have a glass of wine. Where's your wine, Missy?
Where's the wine?
Where's the wine?
All right.
Love what you're saying so far. It really hits it. I said, I love what you're saying so far. It really, rings a bell.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah. And feel free to like type things in, because I'm going to go on and on here for about another 5 or 6 minutes. But then we're going to open it up to a discussion if you want for the final 10. So like I said, I did a lot of research, and I found 10 common barriers to intimacy, and I put them into 2 different things. Like, so 5 that are subjective, 5 that are objective. So the first one was, barriers. When you are speaking with blame, disparagement, and demeaning words, like the comments that you're using to your partner just are not kind. That's a huge barrier. And people might feel like it is unkind, but the words weren't supposed to be unkind. That's why it's in the subjective category. How you perceive things may not be what the other person intended. And so then you have to say, what do you mean by that? Instead of, I can't believe you just said that. Okay, that doesn't work. Number 2, lack of reciprocity. So if anybody knows who Gary Chapman is, Gary Chapman wrote the book, The 5 Love Languages, which is a really great, it's a really great book. And it's basically discussing how do you show appreciation for your partner? And there's 5 different ways. I can't exactly remember what they all are, but like one is acts of service, one is like physical touch, one is like just spending time together. There's 5 different things, right? And so oftentimes we try to show love for our partner by doing what we want them to do for us.
Is that wrong?
And so like we're trying to like show them how much we love them by doing acts of service when all they really want is a hug. Like they could care less about what you're doing. They just want you to hug them or like touch them or hold their hand. Like they need some kind of like, so we're doing all these things and thinking like, why don't they get it? And they're like, why doesn't she get it? And so that's the lack of reciprocity, right? So, and there again, like maybe you're doing these things over and over and over, like you're buying things, you're providing dinner, you're making, and there's no reciprocity. That doesn't feel good either. So sometimes it's just like off. Sometimes the reciprocity is just not what you need, it's what they need. And sometimes it's just not happening. So that's a barrier. So the third one is lack of sharing or inattentiveness or interrupting. So those 3 things all kind of fall into the same category. Like when you're trying to share something and you just keep getting interrupted, you're like, okay, you're not listening to me whatsoever. Or, you know, you're trying to say something and they keep interrupting because they've got something else or they thought of something. And they just can't, they're not listening anymore. So huge barrier. Number 4, we touched on this already, is that defensiveness or deflecting or nagging. Those kind of things all fall into the same category there too. Like what we were saying was, you know, I'm trying to explain something to you and you're like, well, you do that too. Deflection. You know, I need this from you. Well, you didn't say that, you know, like on the defense right away. Huge barrier, right? And so oftentimes to remedy that, you have to be able to just listen and accept what it is that person is saying. Like really think about what are they really saying right now? Is it true? Is it true? Okay. And if it's true, then we go from there. If it's not true, then we go from there. But it's about taking a moment and reflecting, like this person is saying, I'm doing this. Am I doing this? Is what they're doing right now? Do I do that too? Sometimes we do. Then the 5th one is obviously like childish and immature behavior. And like I just said, intimate relationships do not breed mature behavior. It triggers things that are so deep in our psyche that it just, yeah, that's what happens. But that is a barrier if it's not addressed, right? Like we can obviously have a conversation about it. We can obviously journal about it. We can obviously be self-aware enough to know what it is that we're doing and then figure out why and then find a solution. It's a process. So those are the first 5 things that are obvious, right? So then, well, okay, I guess they're all obvious, whatever. So number 6 on the list, right, is basically, you know, addiction, like we talked about earlier. So drugs, alcohol, any kind of addictions are going to be huge barriers to intimacy. Not only because it changes people's moods, it makes you do things and say things that you wouldn't otherwise do. It creates scary, dangerous situations sometimes. And this is where the domestic violence piece falls into as well. And once again, like once you've had a relationship that involves these things, you have a certain amount of PTSD about it. Like there's a fear about that happening again. And maybe it's a fear for your physical safety. Maybe it's a fear for your emotional safety, but it's a real thing. And like I said, there's a ton of resources out there to help people move through and get past a domestic violence scenario. So your local police station can help you. Like if you just Google, any kind of like domestic violence resources, there'll be a ton of them. Thank God, right? Because it's common. And that is a huge barrier to be able to go forward with someone once the trust is gone, whether it's physical or emotional. So another one in this area, this is number 7, right, is communication with your ex. So a barrier to intimacy with a partner is if you are still having a relationship with your ex. And so obviously, like if you have kids, that you're supposed to be talking about, like, when are we getting the kids, like the kid stuff, right? Keeping it within that. But if there's any kind of like anything left, any kind of spark, like any, that is, And so to fix that one, obviously you're just going to be really, really upfront and honest about the communications that you're having. Like, this is why I was talking to him today. And it really is in a child's benefit to experience 2 adults getting along. You are teaching them skills, social skills and relationship skills that they're going to have for the rest of their lives. So it behooves you to be civil. Number 8 on the list is pornography. So like barriers to intimacy, this is so interesting to me. Like all the studies that are done, like women versus men, couples versus singles, like there's a ton of research out there about how watching pornography, like affects your intimate relationships with others. And obviously, like the most detrimental like demographic in that are single males, like single, isolated, alienated males who then have this like weird objectification thing happening of women and of other people, and not engaging in intimate relationships themselves, but voyeuristically watching from afar and having no outlet for that, right? So like couples who watch porn together, like they're usually okay. Women, like there's like the percentage of women versus men who actually like watch pornography on a regular basis is so low. But there again, these are cultural standards too. And but the objectification of another is what is happening during that time. And that is not a good thing to reinforce within one's brain. Number 9, this is something called gatekeeping. Like, so gatekeeping is being very territorial. So like, this is my room. This is my man cave. Don't come in here. Like, or I'm in the kitchen. Don't come in here. Like, this is like when you are territorial about your space and you're like a gatekeeper of something, that is another barrier that people experience in connecting with you, in trusting you, in coming to you in other scenarios too. So you're gonna, this is mine. That's yours. Mine, yours. It's okay to have a my space and a your space, but it can't be forced. It can be agreed on, but it can't be forced. And so then the last one is pretty, obvious, but it's lack of physicality, like lack of touching the other person. And along those lines, I'm just going to go ahead and say this: lack of physical hygiene. Okay, guys? So if you're not taking care of your body, like if you're just not taking care of things, that is a barrier to intimacy. People don't want to smell that and see that and experience that. Take care of your teeth, shave the places that are supposed to be shaved. You know what I mean? Like personal hygiene, it's a thing. And it shows your commitment to yourself as well as to want to be available to someone else. So those are the 10. And, when we deny the needs that we have, we always replace them with defenses. So when we're not getting our needs met, we develop other ways to meet them. And oftentimes it is a defensive mechanism. So let's just see here. The last thing that I had was the 3 ways. This is the other thing that I promised. So 3 things that people can do today to start to work on those intimate relationships and start to, and there again, with yourself, right? We talked about that. You have this intimate relationship with yourself. The first one is working on your communication, working on being okay, being vulnerable, working on being honest, even when it's hard. Sometimes people have just a really hard time being honest with themselves. You know what I mean? Like sometimes we don't want to like food log what we ate because, well, we shouldn't have done that. But if you can be honest with yourself on every single level, that will be able to translate to your honest communication with other people. And just practicing like honesty, going to the bank and being honest with your banker, going to your doctor and being honest with your doctor. Like it's your responsibility, and working on that will create the opportunity for other people to be honest with you. Again, it's back to the mirror. So when you can trust them, they can trust you. So number 2, past communication, is to start to work on your ability to receive. So a lot of times those barriers to intimacy are happening because we have defenses, because we have things set up, we have the walls, we have the PTSD, we have these expectations, but we're not receiving what is being offered. And it can be as simple as receiving a compliment, receiving a gift of words or things, receiving energy, receiving. And being open to that reception allows more to come in, right? And it allows that trust to occur between you and your partner. So, receiving that encouragement and taking it for what it is, receiving help, asking for help, and then receiving it instead of being like, oh no, I got it. Oh no, I got it. I'm fine. Here. And, and those are like, trust building activities, right? Shall we say? So like, you're in it together, you're going to do it together, you're accepting, the give and the take is happening. And then number 3 is being able to have specific rules and boundaries within that relationship that are clearly stated. They're written down. They are clearly stated. They're agreed upon. I know you're making the face, but how else can people really know what you need? How else can they provide you what it is that you really need if you do not verbalize it to them? They cannot read your mind. So those 3 things, working on that, and obviously they all kind of go together, right? But it comes down to us on a daily basis, telling our truth, being honest with ourselves and others, communicating in nonviolent ways, working on receiving the good that is coming to us instead of blocking it for whatever reason. We don't deserve it, or we didn't ask for it, or whatever. Receiving. And then also being very, very clear on what your boundaries are within said intimate relationship. And this is so key. This is so key to get it clear at yourself first. Like if there's something that's not right, you have to figure out what it is. Because you can't ask a person to change or to meet you halfway, even if you aren't clear on what that looks like. So getting clear on rules and boundaries, stating them, writing them down, agreeing to them, having a contract, having a conversation, that goes a long way into creating that safe space that we keep talking about. So that's, I know, right? It's a little heavy, but that's what I have for you guys for today. So Emery, I'm just going to hand it back to you while I drink some water.
Your amount of research and all the plethora of information are all tiny, really good nuggets to know. I had no idea I couldn't have all 3. That's what I've been looking for, and that's why it's been failing. Dude. In my last one, it's like, okay, the physical part, I'm okay. Because the intellectual part was like captivating. And then I was also looking to him to have the spirituality part, but it was there sort of kind of. And then because I didn't have all 3, oh my God, I thought that he wasn't the guy.
So it sounds like you had 1.5.
Yeah, 1.5.
But there again, like, remember what I said, like if you've got 2 solid, it's really worth working on. 1.5, you could probably get 1.5 somewhere else too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it cut to restraining order. By the way, you guys, that's gone really, it went, I have a restraining order, and then so like the city is now having criminal charges against them. So that's off me. So I got what I wanted, and now I'm safe. And now having conversations like this makes me realize, oh my God, you just empowered me. Now I know. And like going through that experience made me realize that I just became a stronger person. And I know that's such a cliche. People say that I had to go through that to realize, but now I know what the law is. I know what domestic violence is, and I put that in the workshop, and I incorporate, all the trauma or drama, the good and the bad, into GirlSpace workshops so we can speak freely about it. And it's just amazing. I'm so happy to have you on here and talk about these intimate issues that were like obvious but not obvious. It's like I want to recycle this all over. It's like talk about equivalent to like how important climate change is. It's like people know this, and I am going to make it my mission so people can know that they can't have it all. Honestly, realistically, you can't have all.
You can't have it all from one person.
Yeah.
Okay. Far be it from me to say you can't have it all.
Because of you can like create different outlets to get what you need.
Exactly.
Spirituality with church,
Yeah.
But this is really great, and this video is recording, and I have a YouTube channel, so this will be posted on my GirlSpace YouTube channel if you'd like to download it or take a look at it, or I could email you a link. Next month, where it's still open, we're going to be getting more people coming in to do more workshops, and if anybody wants to do a workshop, please let me know. I would love to have you. Carolyn, you're amazing. You are just like, you should get paid for this. I'm just kidding.
Listen, Emery, I love doing this. So this was, like I said, super helpful for me to like gather all of my thoughts together. And this, like I said, this was a lot of information. Like we could easily like chunk this out into like 4 or 5 different 10-minute segments. But yeah, it was great. And then also, if people who watch this want to have a conversation about their own stuff, it's easy to reach out to me. You can email me. It's my email is just my name, Carolyn@carolynmaul.com, or reach out to you, and I'm sure you'll put them in touch. But yeah, it was awesome for me to be able to really capture these ideas down. So thank you.
I know to have you back, and I know that we like to touch on different topics, so it's always going to be different. So ladies, stay tuned for the next time we have Miss Carolyn back, because she's always bringing in some nugget of fabulous information. So we'll see you next month, guys.
Ladies. Thank you. Marie. Good to see you.
Good to see
Loved
you.
it. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.